IO9 presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 51 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi, I'm John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor and now publisher of Lightspeed Magazine, and I'm also the editor of several anthologies. I have several coming out next year, including Under the Moons of Mars, which features stories inspired by the Barsoom saga by Edgar Rice Burroughs, Armored, which is about powered armored soldiers in Mecha, and The Mad Scientist Guide to World Domination, which is about mad scientists and evil geniuses trying to take over the world. The most recent book of mine to come out was Lightspeed Year 1, which collects all of the fiction published in the first year of Lightspeed.
And I'm David Barr Kirtley. I'm the author of many short stories, including The Trial of Thomas Jefferson, about a court that uses time travel to put historical figures on trial. The story was originally published in Cicada magazine, and also appeared as episode 13 of the Journey Into podcast.
And as you may have heard, this is going to be our last episode on IO9. While we've gotten a tremendous response from almost everyone that's listened, a large number of visitors to the site just aren't into podcasts, so IO9 has chosen to focus more on text and video. We'd like to thank IO9 for hosting us this past year, which has given us a lot of exposure and enabled us to interview some really amazing guests.
See, and since we made that announcement, we've gotten a bunch of donations, so thanks to everyone who did that. We've actually gotten enough to match what IO9 would have paid us for the next couple episodes, so I think what we're going to do is just produce a few more episodes and post them over at geeksguideshow.com and see how many listeners follow us over there, and we'll decide based on that what we're going to do. If you want to make a donation, just go to geeksguideshow.com and click on the PayPal button in the upper right-hand corner of the page. We're also looking for a new host site, so for details on that, go to geeksguideshow.com and click on advertising. And our plan actually is that by the time you're listening to this, we will have already produced our next episode, episode 52, and released it over on geeksguideshow.com. So as soon as you finish listening to this, head on over to geeksguideshow.com and check out episode 52.
Okay, so now let's get on with the show. Our guest today is Brian Selznick. He's the author and illustrator of numerous picture books, including The Invention of Hugo Cabret. The book was recently adapted into the movie Hugo, directed by Martin Scorsese. Selznick's latest picture book, which is out now, is called Wonderstruck.
All right, so let's get to our interview. All right, so we're here with Brian Selznick. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Okay, so first of all, for people who haven't read The Invention of Hugo Cabret, what's it about?
It's about a boy who's living secretly in the walls of a train station in Paris in 1931, and he ends up meeting Georges Méliès, the filmmaker who made the first science fiction movie, A Trip to the Moon.
So illustrations play a major role in the book. Could you sort of describe for our listeners what the book looks like?
When I was illustrating the book, I was thinking about how I could make a book that simulates or echoes what a movie does. So there's these long narrative picture sequences in my book. So you're reading a little bit, the text stops, you turn the page, and there's a full double-page spread illustration of something. And then often for the next 20 pages, you follow the story visually through the pictures until the pictures stop and it gets picked back up again with the text.
So now the book is also available as an audiobook. Given how important the art is, how does that work on audio?
Yeah, the audiobook was a bit of an experiment that came about before the book was published. When I was making this book, I had no idea that it was going to be successful and that people were going to like it. And so I was approached by Scholastic Audio about making an audio adaptation. And it was such a weird idea because the book is all about what is happening with the pictures. And I just thought, well, what if this is the only way people experience my story? What if no one reads the book, but they find the audio? So I kind of felt like I should do it if I could. And I was thinking about the year that the book takes place, which is 1931, and the fact that that was a couple of years after sound was introduced to the movies. And there were a lot of early directors like René Clair in France. They were using it in very weird and experimental ways. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do a sound experiment with my plot, where I take the picture sequences and replace them as much as I can with sound effects so that you have this similar thing from the book, but different. So the audio version, I had to rewrite parts of the story because in the book, for example, the boy Hugo is handed this handkerchief and you turn the page and he opens it and inside are the ashes of this notebook that he had been hoping to get back. And so I had to write new text for that section. And then in the book, it might say the doorbell rang or the bell rang, and I was able to take that text out of the audiobook and replace it with a sound effect.
I mean, you mentioned the director, Georges Méliès, and he had a pretty interesting life story. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, Méliès was originally a magician. He owned a magic theater that had been built by Jean-Robert Houdin, who was the magician that Houdini later named himself after. And Houdin was also a clockmaker and made a lot of his magic effects in his clock shop and built these very, very beautiful and very complicated automatons. And Méliès inherited these automatons when he bought the magic theater. And he was around when the Lumiere brothers invented the cinema. The Lumiere brothers actually thought that cinema was just a gimmick, and it would be like a cool thing that could record things in real life, like people coming out of a factory or a train coming into a station. But that was all the potential they saw for it. And Méliès built his own movie camera using parts from some of the old automatons. And he realized that this new medium could tell stories, that it could be like filming, like recording dreams in the middle of the day. And so he was one of the first narrative filmmakers, and he is most well known for this movie, A Trip to the Moon, where the rocket goes into the eye of the man on the moon. I'm sure a lot of your listeners are very aware and very familiar with this movie, and if not, then that image. And at the end of his life, the cinema sort of went past him. You know, the camera that he used almost never moved. It was mounted to the floor. So if anything, if he needed to do a close-up, he would put somebody on a roller and roll them up to the camera. So it looked like a close-up, but in fact, it was the subject moving, not the camera. And then, of course, you know, directors came along and they were moving the camera all through the world and doing these incredible things. And World War I came, and suddenly he fell completely out of fashion. He ended up burning his old sets and costumes and a lot of his old negatives. And he married, his second wife was one of the actresses from his movies, Jeanne Darcy. And she was the owner of a toy booth in a train station in Paris. And Méliès spent the last years of his life working in this freezing cold toy booth 7 days a week, raising their granddaughter, Madeleine, after her mother died and her father ran away. And at the very end of his life, he was rediscovered by this new group of artists called the Surrealists. And at the very end of his life, he was rescued and celebrated and given a big gala and got to be the first resident and new home for people in the film industry that was created by France. And so it has a happy ending after a very long period of despair. And and a couple years ago, I stumbled upon this book called Edison's Eve about the history of automatons, and learned that Méliès had this collection of automatons that had been owned by Jean-Robert Houdin, and that at the end of his life, when he lost all his money and was, you know, going to work in the toy booth, the automatons were donated to a local museum who didn't take care of them, and they were all destroyed and thrown away. And when I read that, I imagined this kid climbing through the garbage and finding one of those broken machines. The automaton in my book is based very closely on an automaton at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia called the Mallardet automaton. And I found it just through Google. I was just looking up automatons and I needed to research them for my book. I didn't know how they really worked. And it turned out there was this, you know, it was this beautiful automaton at the Franklin Institute, but over the years, because it's very old, it broke, and so it wasn't on display when I called the Franklin Institute. But they invited me to come see it in the basement, and the head was off, and the gears weren't working. But the curator was able to show me how it would work and what would engage when you wound it up, and what parts would touch other parts. You know, and then I met a guy who's this, you know, brilliant mechanical genius who I introduced to people at the Franklin Institute, and he went and fixed the automaton. And so now the automaton it's back on display, and it's the centerpiece of this beautiful exhibition.
How did the film come about, and how long did the process whole take from the time when it was first optioned?
Yeah, the time period before the book was published, there was a lot going on. I was finishing the book. I was, talking about making that audio version. And one of the things that also happens is that, publishers make these advanced readers copies, which are sort of like, paperback versions of books that are about to be published a few months later. And they send these to bookstores and reviewers and librarians so they can get ready for their, orders and their reviews. And what I did not know at the time was that there are people in Hollywood whose job is to get these advanced readers copies and see if any of these books might make good movies. And so one of the books made their way to the office of Graham King, who won the Oscar for Best Picture for The Departed. And I got a phone call saying that Martin Scorsese wanted to make a movie of the book, again, before the book was actually published. And so, as you can imagine, it was a completely shocking and jaw-dropping phone call. And it was amazing. So that was, I don't know, like 2006, I think. The book came out in 2007. And, that's Hollywood, is crazy and things happen and then they don't happen and people are on a project and then they're off a project. And so things were kind of touch and go with the movie version. John Logan was hired to write an adaptation of the script, and I got to read some early versions of that. But then, for various reasons, Scorsese had to leave the project, and a couple of years went by, and eventually I just thought that it just wasn't going to happen. But Scorsese came back, and once he came back, everything was like a steamroller. Everything happened super fast, and it felt relatively anyway. I think in the end, Scorsese worked just on Hugo for about 2 years, from storyboarding and getting everything ready and having the script written and the sets designed and built and the costumes and hiring the actors and getting everything ready to go, and then the actual filming began. And so he'd been on the project since 2006, 2007. But then it all was made in the last 2 years.
Yeah, and you actually wrote a book called The Hugo Movie Companion about the whole process of making the movie. I mean, what made you decide to want to write that book, and how much of the stuff were you around for and involved in?
Yeah, I was on the set for about 2 weeks towards the end of the shoot, and I was invited originally just to come for one day because they were a little busy and working in 3D was very difficult. But once I got to the set and met everybody, they kept inviting me to come back the next day and the next day and the next day. So I ended up being there for about 2 weeks, and I became really obsessed with the extras, because on any given day there were 300 to 500 extras walking through this train station who all looked like they had stepped out of a Brisai photograph. I asked if I could come see them getting into costume and makeup one morning. And so, it's 7:00 the next morning, I was in the extras tent watching this, factory of extras get turned into these, beautiful visions from 1931. And, David Davenport eventually turned to me and said, "Do you want to be an extra? Do you want to be in the movie?" I was like, yeah, sure. And I was going to be an extra standing in the corner with a champagne glass, trembling, trying not to look at the camera as it was going to go by me. And I was so nervous. And all of the actors from the movie are in this scene. It's got 15 speaking parts in this scene. And it was, all had to be done in one take. And the assistant director came up to me with a script and said, "Here's your line, memorize it. We start rehearsing in a couple of minutes." And I was like, "What?" And so it turned out I was given a line, and suddenly I'm on the set, standing next to Sir Ben Kingsley, saying my line to him, and it was amazing. It was just amazing. And so I got back. I was finishing up my next book, Wonderstruck, and I thought, I've had these incredible experiences, and I want to write about what it was like. And so I had this idea to make the movie companion, and I arranged to interview 40 people, from Scorsese to the dog trainer, including all the actors, from Sir Ben to Asa Butterfield to Sacha Baron Cohen. And I asked everybody, what their job was on the movie, to please define it for kids, to talk about, what they did, to talk about their childhoods, to talk about, what movies they loved as a kid. And actually, the only person who couldn't do it was Sacha Baron Cohen, because he only gives interviews in character. So in the book, the section about Sasha is actually about Gustav D'Aste, the station inspector. And it's really funny and really weird. My boyfriend David Serlin is an academic at UC San Diego, and he wrote essays about the history of automatons and Georges Méliès and what Paris was like in 1931, so you have some historical context. And David wrote about the history of film, and Scorsese read it and said, "Oh, this is pretty good, but I want to write my own for you." So Scorsese wrote a 500-word essay on the birth of cinema for this book. And so it was just, it was a very hard project to make, especially because I was trying to finish up another book at the time, but it was really exciting to work on it.
And so you mentioned your new novel, Wonderstruck. Could you tell us what that's about?
It's two different stories. One is set in 1977, about a boy who runs away from Minnesota to New York in search of his father. And the other story is set in 1927, 50 years earlier, about a girl who runs away to New York in search of this actress who she's obsessed with. And the stories are told in different manners. The story that's set in 1977 is told all with words, and then the story that's set in 1927 is told all with pictures. And then these two stories weave back and forth and join up at the end, making a single narrative. So if you flip through the book, which is 100 pages longer than Hugo, it looks the same, but the reading experience is very different because you have these two different narratives. And both of the kids in the book are deaf. And then both of the kids, 50 years apart, end up at the Museum of Natural History. And so a lot of the book is also an homage to the book From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg about two kids who run away to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And so, yeah, I wanted to take what I did with Hugo and try to do something slightly different with it. So I had the idea to separate the words from the pictures. And in trying to think about what kind of story would make sense visually for the picture story, I remembered a documentary I saw called Through Deaf Eyes about deaf history and deaf education. And there was a quote from an educator who talked about how deaf people are the people of the eye, which I think has something to do with the fact that sign language is a language that you look at to understand. And when you can't hear, what you see becomes even more important. So I thought maybe it would be interesting to tell the story of a deaf person just with pictures. That way the way the story is told echoes how that character would experience their life. And when a couple people read Hugo, they told me that when they got to the pictures, it felt like everything became silent. So I thought that silence might be an interesting thing to play with in the book. And so that became Wonderstruck.
So in the acknowledgments, you mentioned a number of real-life experiences that influenced the story. Could you tell us a bit about some of those?
Yeah, when I was growing up, I used to come to New York City pretty rarely because I grew up in New Jersey and my parents hated New York, but we would come in to see the Museum of Natural History. And one of my favorite parts of the museum has always been the dioramas. And there's this beautiful diorama in the museum of these two wolves running through the snow at night, and it's got this very mysterious blue moonlight. It's very beautiful. And when I was working on Wonderstruck, I knew I wanted to have the Museum of Natural History as part of the plot, and I thought it would be interesting to try to weave in this wolf diorama somehow. And so I was reading the plaque on the wall that was describing this diorama, and it said it was from a place called Gunflint Lake, Minnesota, which I had never heard of. So I did a little research, and I ended up going to visit Gunflint Lake in the nearest town, Grand Marais, which turned out to be an artist's colony filled with puppeteers and painters and children's book illustrators and jewelers. And Gunflint Lake itself is right on the border with Canada, and it's this beautiful place, and no one there knew that it was represented in this diorama in the middle of New York City. And so I thought it would be interesting to write a story about a boy from Gunflint Lake who finds himself in New York for the first time and stumbles upon this diorama and is shocked to discover that it is from the place that he's born, And on top of that, he's been having these very weird dreams of being chased by wolves through the snow at night. And the diorama is an exact representation of his dreams. So part of the book is a mystery that has to do with this boy's connection to the diorama. But it was actually going to Gunflint Lake and meeting the people there that really fleshed out the story. But it all happened, because I, wanted to incorporate the diorama into the plot. And, and then my boyfriend teaches with two of the leading deaf scholars in the country, Carol Padden and Tom Humphreys. And so they were very generous with their time and read the manuscript and helped me make sure that everything about deaf culture and deaf education was accurate. But then, even more importantly, they helped me make sure that the way I described the experience of being deaf felt accurate. Because as a hearing person, I could read books and I could use my imagination, but, there's a big difference between imagining what it's like being deaf and actually being deaf. And so Carol and Tom, and my conversations with them were instrumental in helping me make the book.
All right. Well, we're unfortunately all out of time. Maybe just to wrap things up, do you want to talk about what are you up to right now? Any new or upcoming projects you want to mention?
Yeah, I'm now just starting to work on my next book, and I'm not really talking too much about it other than the fact that I do think it's going to be another big illustrated book. One of the challenges is always figuring out, what can I do with it that's different than the last book. But I have a few ideas. I think I have the characters and the setting and the time period. And, I'm looking forward to being able to sit down and really work on it. But, I've got some fun things to do with the movie coming up, going to the premieres. And so I'm excited about, participating in all of that. But then once all of that settles down, I'm really looking forward to just getting back to my desk and working on my next book.
All right, great. Well, Brian Selznick, thanks so much for joining us on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
All right, thanks so much. It was really great to talk to you.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Brian Selznick for joining us on the show. And for our discussion today, we're going to be talking about upcoming movies that are being adapted from classic fantasy and science fiction books. And we have a special guest geek joining us today. Matt London is a graduate of NYU Film School and has worked for several years as a video editor. He attended the Clarion Writers Workshop, and his articles on film, television, and video games have appeared in Lightspeed, Realms of Fantasy, and on Tor.com. His short story Moja appeared in John's anthology The Living Dead 2. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
All right, and so the first thing I think we're going to talk about is the upcoming Ender's Game movie. And it's kind of a nice segue from Brian Selznick, because the actor who starred in the Hugo movie, Asa Butterfield, has been cast to play Ender Wiggin. This is going to inevitably involve some spoilers for Ender's Game. So if you have not read Ender's Game, stop listening now, go read it, and come back. But so, John, you went and saw Hugo, right? What did you think of Asa Butterfield as Ender Wiggin?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard call. I think that he did pretty well in Hugo. Playing Ender is going to be a much different experience. I'm a little happier. I'm kind of happy that he's on the younger side. They've said all along that to cast the role of Ender, they're going to have to age up all the actors so that they're, all the characters so that they're not actually as young as they are in Ender's Game, because it would just be too hard to get a child actors who can really act well at that young of an age, and to have the whole cast be that age.
Well, you mentioned how hard it is to get good kid actors. I was watching recently the commentary for James Cameron's Aliens, and they were saying how hard it was to get the Newt character, and that all the little kids that they auditioned all had experience doing TV commercials and had been trained to smile after every line. And so you can just imagine, aliens ripped my parents apart. Smile, Ender's Game has been in development for almost 30 years, I think. And it's such a popular story, and, there's so much action and cool ideas and stuff that it seems like a really natural thing to make a movie out of. But sort of the more you think about it, the more you start to realize how many real problems there are in terms of just sort of practically getting it to the screen. A lot of the story takes place in Ender's head. And if you're not inside his head, you're just watching what he's doing. You're just seeing him sort of winning at laser tag a lot and then periodically beating another little kid to death.
Yeah, I wonder if they're going to have to do some voiceover or something to help communicate some of what is going through Ender's head.
I attended I guess it was like a panel at a convention where Card was talking about, this was a few years ago, and he was talking about, where Ender's Game was in development. And what Card said was, if you guys are anxious to see, like, if you want to know what the Ender's Game movie is going to be, just read the comic, because the comic is the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So check it out. It's I think it's a decent comic adaptation, and it deals, I think, quite well with how to, visualize those internal struggles that he's going through.
I mean, one thing I heard Card say was that, he wrote this parallel novel to Ender's Game, called Ender's Shadow, which is about Bean. It's like the same story as Ender's Game, except told from the point of view of Bean. And he had sort of indicated that at one stage in the screenplay, they had taken a lot of material from Ender's Shadow and sort of merged it into Ender's Game, so that you had more of sort of a buddy movie dynamic with Ender and Bean, so that they could talk to each other and you could get their interior feelings. Because I mean, if you actually, there's this book called The Ender Companion, and there's this chapter in it going through the whole development history of the Ender's Game movie, and it's, it's like 30 pages long or something. It just goes on and on and on. But one thing that Card has said is that, for years he's wanted to make the movie, and that Hollywood filmmakers, they always want Ender to be a teenager. They want him to be like 18 or something. They want there to be a love interest and a happy ending. And
the happy ending is the most ridiculous thing. I mean, obviously, like the whole point of what makes Ender's Game so powerful, or part of what makes Ender's Game so powerful, is that they are so young, but also the ending that it has. I mean, it's like, why bother adapting it if you're going to change all that?
But you can see you can see the temptation for a filmmaker to have an ending where Ender figures out that the game is real and he doesn't commit xenocide, right? Mm-hmm. That's a really sort of neat ending for a movie. Mm-hmm. And the ending of the book is very sort of complicated and, hard to put on screen and stuff.
Actually, one thing I'm kind of curious about is, and maybe Matt, you can speak to this having read the comic, but I'm kind of curious how much of a factor the Valentine and Peter sort of dialogues are going to have in the movie.
I mean, it is present in the comics. I mean, my own personal opinion is that, if you read the book today, I think that the Peter Valentine sequences are probably the most sort of dated of the novel. There's a great XKCD comic about this, where they sort of, he sort of puts the two of them on screen, and their reasoning is, let's post to these message boards and talk about our political opinions, and people on those boards will see how insightful we are, and then decide that we should run the country or the world because we know the answers because we're the smartest people. It's a little implausible given like how the internet has developed in actuality, as opposed to like how it was sort of being speculated about in Ender's Game.
Well, I mean, certainly, when I was a kid, I read that, that subplot and was really taken with it, and just couldn't wait until, I could write my political opinions on the internet and, develop a huge following and have political influence and stuff. And then, the actual internet comes along and, you type your political opinions and people are just shout obscenities at you, and and that's basically all that happens. That was kind of a letdown. But I mean, I don't think that the book is that far. I mean, is that far off in its predictions compared to what existed when it was predicting it. I mean, we have seen the way that you can just build a big following online and wield a lot of influence, and it's not really too hard to imagine it being done anonymously or having big influences on politics, like like the way Twitter has affected the Arab Spring and stuff like that.
I suppose it's true that at some point in our lifetimes, there may be a U.S. president who was also a blogger, or something like that.
Or a podcaster.
Or a podcaster.
Yeah, Dave, actually, I mean, your undergraduate degree is in like political philosophy or something like that, right? I mean, were you inspired by Ender's Game to actually go into that, or? Yeah,
well, I'm sure that played a role. Yeah, that and I really liked a lot of science fiction. that had political aspects to it. I mean, stuff also like Starship Troopers, although, I mean, I wouldn't, I wouldn't endorse the politics, but just the idea of politics in a science fiction book, really appealed to me. And I really did. And, like Asimov's Foundation, stuff like that has sort of a political aspect to it. And that did, I mean, definitely, I mean, I majored in political science explicitly because I found that stuff interesting in science fiction, and I wanted to know about it to write better science fiction, and to write science fiction built around those sorts of ideas.
Cool. Well, yeah, but I mean, getting back to the casting, I was actually just looking it up, and I couldn't find. I mean, I see somebody who's listed as for Peter. I don't actually see whoever they have cast for Valentine, but
Abigail Breslin is playing Valentine.
Okay. I don't actually know. What's she been in?
She was, I believe, the girl in Little Miss Sunshine.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. No, I think I did hear that. Yeah, and I mean, actually, so that seems promising. And, I mean, most of the other supporting cast that I've seen seems pretty great. Like, I mean, Ben Kingsley as Mazer Rackham. I mean, that's pretty exciting. And Harrison Ford as Graf. Like, that's great.
I am excited about that casting, though. I mean, I would never have thought of that, I don't think, but it is perfect. I mean, that Colonel Graf is sort of, I can totally see him as sort of like Han Solo 30 years later with this like shitty job he doesn't want to do,
This is what I get for helping the rebellion in general now.
Well, isn't in the book, I believe Graf is described as being like immensely fat, right?
I don't remember.
I don't remember exactly the language, but I think he's described as being like this kind of like gruff, washed up, desk flying sort of he's constantly about to be fired. I mean, I love Harrison Ford in this role because of all those things you're saying. And also because we haven't really seen him in a full-on space opera kind of movie in a long, long time. And it feels so right to have him back in the shoes of, Han Solo, Deckard. And I think it's a good sign for the movie that he's a part of it.
And then Haley Steinfeld as Petra. I mean, I don't know that she's right, sort of ethnically to be Petra, but I mean, she's a great actress. I mean, if anybody saw True Grit, I mean, the remake of True Grit, the Coen Brothers version. I mean, oh my God, she was amazing in that.
Yeah.
And I mean, like carried the movie.
Gavin Hood is a director who I'm kind of torn on. He's an Oscar winner. He directed Satsi, which was a foreign Oscar winner. A few years ago, which I haven't seen, but most people say is a really good movie. He also directed the X-Men Origins Wolverine,
right?
Which makes me really nervous, because there are a number of directors like this who do really thought-provoking, beautiful, low-budget films, and then because they get popular based on those films, they get a ton of money thrown at them to make some huge Hollywood blockbuster.
Right.
And it's a disaster for whatever reason.
Let me see if I can think of one. How about the guy who directed Alien Resurrection?
Genet is his name. There's so many more that we can name. But I think that Ender's Game, unlike something like Wolverine, is a movie where the story and the characters really do come first. And the special effects and the, sort of the backdrop, are very much secondary. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to, sort of embrace, the actor work and really make it a movie about those performances. And, we may not know what Butterfield can do yet, but I think that as soon as you see that one production still of him in the suit with his eyes looking intense, it'll sell everybody.
I can already see what the trailer or the first teaser is going to be. It's going to be a close-up of Ender, and he's going to be looking into the camera, and he's going to say, like, the enemy's gate is down, and then it's going to pan out to showing the battle room, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's going to be awesome. Can't wait for that.
I mean, one thing that's been really controversial about Ender's Game is just the violence and, like, kids doing the violence. I mean, what do you guys think about how that's going to make a transition to film? I mean, the book starts out with Ender kicking a kicking a kid in the balls until he dies, you know. I mean, later on also, I mean, there's this scene where Ender's in the shower, and then all these boys come and corner him, and then another boy, like, strips down naked because he doesn't want to have an unfair advantage, and they fight, and Ender ends up killing him, too. Like, how is that, how can you possibly put that in a big-budget Hollywood movie?
And I think one of the hard things, too, is that, you know, obviously you have a movie that looks like it's centered around kids, or, I mean, well, obviously it is centered around kids, but it looks like it's going to be a kids movie based on the fact that it is centered around kids. There's going to be a lot of pressure for them to make that, you know, at the most PG. But, like, I mean, there's no way they can make this not anything less than PG-13, I don't think. I mean, really, it should be rated R, given how much violence should be in it based on the book. But yeah, I think the best we're going to get is a PG-13 movie. Although that's probably okay, because I think there's a lot you can do in PG-13. It's like, you know, because there's no sex. And that's the only thing that really pushes something to R. Like violence, oh man, you can have all kinds of violence in PG-13. You know, kids, they can see violence, but don't show them any sex. Yeah, as far as the nudity goes, I mean, I'm sure they'll work around that. I mean, they'll probably, you know, be in underwear or something, or, you know, they'll figure out something to make that scene sort of still happen, but not, you know, quite the way it happens in the book, you know.
I mean, one of the big draws of Ender's Game, obviously, is actually seeing the battle room, the zero-gravity laser tag kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's really shocking to me how awesome the idea of zero-gravity combat is, and how little of it we've ever... The only example I can really think in a movie is there's one scene in Star Trek VI where they shut off the gravity, and some Klingons get shot and their pink blood is floating around. That's kind of cool, but...
Also, the James Bond film Moonraker. There's a zero-G, like, storming of a space station, and there's people getting shot all over the place.
I haven't seen it. Is that good? I haven't seen it.
Moonraker?
Is the zero-gravity stuff well done?
It has a man who bites through the elevator cable with his teeth. What do you think? Is it good?
But I mean, in Ender's Game, there's this whole subplot involving Ender playing this fantasy game on his computer. I could see that being cut, you know. Is that in the comic book, Matt?
It is in the comic book, briefly. But I think that, because it's something that Card really likes. If I'm not mistaken, he may have started with that game. That, like, the giant game, that's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I might be making this up. But I vaguely remember something where Card said that he had this idea for the game, or that maybe it was a separate idea that he incorporated later, which of course would mean that I think it'd be really easy to cut the game, just from a Hollywood kind of like screenwriting standpoint, because you always want it to be shorter.
Okay, so now the Ender's Game novel was written explicitly to set up the sequel, Speaker for the Dead. Are there any plans to make Speaker for the Dead? I haven't heard anything about that.
Is it a Hollywood movie? Yes, there will be a sequel.
Actually, I'm not sure that they'll actually go right to Speaker for the Dead. I think they would, if they're going to do any sequels, they would make the Shadow book. They would adapt the Shadow books into movies, because those explicitly follow Ender's Game in the Enderverse timeline, as far as I recall.
No, right. So, if people don't know, the Shadow books are the sequels to Ender's Shadow that follow what happens to Bean after the events of Ender's Game, whereas Ender goes off into space in Speaker for the Dead.
Yeah, because the reason I'm saying this actually is, you know, if you don't know, Speaker for the Dead takes place like 1,000 years after or something, because of time dilation and everything. So it's like basically it's like nothing to do with Ender's Game. I mean, like Card needed to write Ender's Game in order to, you know, figure out everything for Ender in Speaker for the Dead. But I mean, it's like they're such totally different books.
One thing that the producers could do in terms of making a sequel is, you know, you want something that's a direct sequel, and you want to keep your main character.
Oh, right. Yeah, there's also Ender in Exile, right?
Ender in Exile, right.
Yeah, I haven't actually read that one. I know it's been it was received somewhat controversially amongst the Ender fans.
I think lukewarm is the way to describe its reception.
Right.
Because it's sort of jammed into the middle. You know, it's sort of like the entire book takes place between like the third to last and second to last chapters of Ender's Game.
Oh, okay.
And there was a lot of retconning that had to go on to make it work.
But I mean, Card actually rewrote Ender's Game a couple times. I mean, there have been...
Yeah, because it was first a novella published in analog, and then he expanded it into the novel. But then, like, if you go buy the book, if you go buy the book today, it actually says, author's preferred edition. So, yeah, I mean, he clearly, there's clearly a couple of versions floating out there. I actually do have a copy of, like, the original novel length version as it was originally published. I haven't actually tried to read that one, because I've read the modern version, the author's preferred edition. I've read that multiple times, but I don't know what the actual differences are. I'd actually be curious to see if someone could itemize what the differences are between the two versions.
All right, so then another movie coming out is Disney's John Carter, based on the work of Edgar Rice Burroughs, particularly the first book in his Mars series, The Princess of Mars.
The next anthology I have coming out is called Under the Moons of Mars, and it's based on the same work here. It's based on the Barsoom novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and so these are all new adventures, sort of about John Carter and the other characters in those stories. And so I'm really excited about the movie. I hope it does very well. And not only because that'll help my book do well, but yeah, for this version, Andrew Stanton, he directed WALL-E, so I'm really excited about that. It's his first live action movie. Although obviously, since if you know anything about these books, there's going to be tons and tons of special effects. So this is like sort of akin to Avatar in terms of, like, basically it's half animated, half live action. Because there's so much digital effects in the movie.
It's funny that you bring up Avatar, because Avatar is basically just a ripoff of Princess of Mars, right? This soldier gets taken to a faraway world where he's never been, and there's these two warring factions, and one is freaky looking and tribal, and the other one is like technologically advanced and human-ish, right? And then they fight. There's this love story with a hot alien chick, and like it's the same movie. So it's funny because I think originally there might have been one point where they were both going to come out at the same time. And there was much more of a controversy about it then. But now that it's been years, people have kind of forgotten about Avatar, I think.
Yeah, Jon Favreau was going to direct it for a while there, and it looked like it was really going to happen. I think that was around the time Avatar came out that it was looking like that was going to be the one. But
right. So potential directors for the John Carter movie have included John McTiernan, Robert Rodriguez, Carrie Conran, who directed Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow.
Right.
So he was hired.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then left the production for unknown reasons. My reason, I think, is that the producers watched Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. And then Jon Favreau, who left, and now Andrew Stanton. Projects like this that pass direct, like multiple writers, multiple productions, movies can sometimes survive that and end up with a decent product. But when you go through that many directors, danger, Will Robinson.
Okay, so I actually have a story in John's anthology, so I also have a vested interest in hoping that this movie does well and, makes John Carter really popular. But I have to say, I kind of have a bad feeling about it, watching the trailer. I feel uneasy. Does anybody else have that reaction to the trailer?
Well, based on the trailer, I don't know if it's going to be good, but I do think it's going to be popular. So, that part, at least I'm not worried about at this point. I think it's definitely going to be popular. I'm not sure if it's going to be good. I hope it's going to be good. There
was a lot of stuff I didn't recognize from the book in the trailer. Like there's some sort of like new super weapon or something.
Right. Well, so that raises another question is, we've discussed, is it going to be popular? Is it going to be good? But is it going to be a Princess of Mars? It seems like there's this urge in Hollywood to sort of make whatever the source material is Hollywood. I think that it could go one of two ways. If there are things that you see in the trailers that are totally unrecognizable to you, part of that may be that there are certain things in those early books that are really dated, just in the way that, society's changed since. They came out in the 20s, the teens?
Well, because this is the 100th anniversary. It's 1912.
Yeah.
So 1912.
Yeah, right, 1912, right.
The stuff that I saw that was unfamiliar was a lot of the Deja Thoris stuff, and I expect her to take on a much more active and clothed role in the movie.
Some of that stuff about them like falling onto flying machines was reminding me of, and not in a good way, of Star Wars Episode 2. I mean, obviously nothing related to Star Wars Episode 2 reminds you of anything in a good way. But,
yeah, and well, it can't possibly
two lightsabers at once.
It can't possibly be as bad as Episode 2, but as far as will it be Princess of Mars, I think it will feel very much like it, even if there are things that changed. I mean, just because like I know Shaban is such a fanboy, and based on interviews I've seen with Stanton, he seems like a real fanboy too. So I mean, I don't think that they would change it too much that it would be unrecognizable. At least that's what I'm hoping. I am kind of puzzled that they changed the name of it from John Carter of Mars to just John Carter. It's like, what, were they afraid that people are going to think it's science fiction or something? Like this story about a guy who goes to Mars and leaps around like Superman and fights alien creatures. I mean, like, don't want to get any of that sci-fi cooties on it or anything, but
Andrew Stanton said in an interview that that's exactly why they took Of Mars out of the title, was to open it up to a wider audience.
Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, come on. I mean, anybody who sees this trailer, they're going to see it's on Mars. What the hell?
But I could maybe see the reasoning sort of being that, you know, people know what Mars is like and it's not like this. And so people who see the trailers might go see an Avatar type movie, but might be slightly turned off by the Mars, you know, being totally inaccurate sort of kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, I can see that. That makes me feel better about the decision, actually. You know, because like obviously, like when you know, in the story, it's going to be called Barsoom. You know, in the movie, it's going to be called Barsoom, and I mean, I'm sure at some point John Carter must say Mars or something. But I mean, yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it might as well not be Mars.
Yeah, I really hope that John Carter is a good movie. We haven't had a real swashbuckling sci-fi movie in a long time.
It would also make me and my publisher very happy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Again, it's called Under the Moons of Mars, and it's available in February. So
who are some of the other authors in that book, John?
All right, so it's got stories by like Joe Lansdale, Peter S. Beagle, Tobias Buckell, Robin Wasserman, Austin Grossman, Genevieve Valentine, S.M. Sterling, Kat Valente, Jonathan Mayberry, folks like that. And Tamara Pierce wrote the foreword. And there's also a pretty cool sort of glossary in the back by Richard Lupoff, who's like a Barsoom scholar or Burroughs scholar more generally. But it's just sort of introducing you to all the various terms and terminology in the story, and you know, give you some background on characters. So like if you read the books when you were younger and you haven't read them since, haven't thought about them since, you know, sort of fresh in your memory. And also the book's actually fully illustrated. It's got every story has an illustration. So like there's one by Charles Vess, by Gregory Manchess, Mike Cavallaro, John Picasso. So yeah, if you're interested in the anthology at all, or if you like John Carter of Mars and Barsoom, you know, you'll want to check it out.
All right, so The Hobbit trailer just came out. What'd you guys think?
It looks like The Hobbit. It looks like The Hobbit with really badass dwarves. Because my introduction to The Hobbit was the animated film. That was my vision of Middle Earth, basically until the new movies came out. The Lord of the Rings trilogy came out.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the trailer looked good. I mean, it you know, it's about what I expected. I mean, you know, it's Peter Jackson. He's awesome. The you know, the Lord of the Rings movies were awesome, and you know, I expect this will be awesome. But actually, like Matt, I think my first exposure was also the animated film, although I did read the book and love the book as a kid as well. But yeah, I mean, I think...
Hey, wait, time out. I also read the book. I don't want to get that implication. I've read all the books.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to imply that.
No, that's okay. It's okay.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it looks good. It looks promising. I'm a little dubious about, like, you know, whatever it is that they're going to add, you know, because they're making it into 2 movies, which is going to not only be the contents of The Hobbit, but also sort of bridge the gap between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, I think, right?
Yeah, that's
Right.
my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a little dubious, like what they're gonna do to add all that stuff, or what they're gonna add, But I mean, hey, I trust Peter Jackson. I mean, based on Lord of the Rings, I mean, you got to give the man some rope. So
There was this comment I saw that was really funny where somebody posted on YouTube to the trailer and they said, "This looks like the biggest Lord of the Rings ripoff I've ever seen. Like, it even looks like they have the same guy playing the wizard. Is this what Hollywood has come to?" And it was like completely serious,
I can't, I saw that. I can't believe that that's actually serious. Like, it just has to be a joke. It says from the producer, director, writer, stars, and country of Lord of the Rings comes the Hobbit. Like,
yeah, but this is a YouTube comment we're talking about.
No, I know.
It's a genre in itself.
Yeah. Although I will say one thing about the trailer, like, I mean, I knew this just based on the casting, but Martin Freeman, perfect. Like,
yeah, he's very good.
I mean, anybody, just like, that's the perfect casting.
He even looks a little bit not like himself,
Mhm.
which I think is really nice.
Mhm.
They've sort of pudged him up and furred him up
Yeah.
a lot. Like, Elijah Wood was this sort of like baby-faced angel in those movies. But
He's very
Martin
elfin.
Freeman looks way more like a hobbit, I
I
think.
agree.
See, so Matt, apparently they're filming this movie at 48 frames per second or something, like double the usual. Can you explain what that's going to look like?
Do you want me to give you like a sort of 101 on how film projection works? Because it's really boring.
No, don't say anything boring.
Okay. Basically,
from my point of view, am I gonna look at it and be like, this is amazing, or is it just gonna be
you will not have any idea that there's something different. you really won't be able to tell.
So what's the point?
Well, what the point is that it will create more of a fluidity between the individual frames. The motions and actions of the characters will feel somewhat liquidy almost, or smoother. They'll feel smoother.
I also really enjoyed the was it Rankin Bass, the animated movie? Like, what do you guys imagine is going to be different about the live action version compared to that?
I would guess there's probably going to be less singing, although there is some singing in the trailer. I mean, my bigger question is, like, where is this first movie going to end? And where's the second one going to pick up?
You can sort of glean from the trailer what we know we will see, which at least gets them escaping from the Goblin Mountain. But, we also don't know how much of the sort of Gandalf plot we're going to get. We know that Benedict Cumberbatch is playing both Smaug and the Necromancer, which is referred to in the book as this sort of evil wizard that Gandalf goes off and fights.
I have to say, they should have got James Earl Jones to do it.
To do the voice of Smaug. When Guillermo del Toro was going to direct the movie, and he was going to have, I think, Ron Perlman do it, I thought that was a great casting choice.
That's a good call.
Actually, have you guys seen the BBC series Sherlock?
Yeah.
Because I didn't get it when I first started watching it, but by the end of that first episode, I was totally convinced that this guy was perfect for Smaug. His face is like a lizard's face. And he has this so much more gravitas in his voice than you would expect someone who looks like that to have. So if they'd just put some sensors on that dude's face, I mean, his eyeballs will be blinking sideways. It'll be great. I mean, it's awesome.
He certainly got a good Lord of the Rings type of name. I mean, Cumberbatch. That sounds like he's a hobbit.
Yeah, it sounds like a made up name.
It does.
Well, I mean, speaking of Guillermo del Toro, I mean, I was kind of curious. I was not sure how that was going to go, because Del Toro sort of hit or miss for me, and I could have seen it being amazing or sort of not being The Hobbit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I did kind of I when I saw this trailer, I thought it looked really good, but I sort of felt at the same time it looks exactly like Fellowship of the Ring, which I've already seen 30 times. Like same exact Gandalf, same exact Rivendell, same exact Gollum, etc. And it did kind of make me wonder if, I've watched the Lord of the Rings movies so many times that this is going to have a diminished effect, being so similar in style to those.
I actually like that there's that unity of design. in the films. I think that'll make it feel more like a prequel, sequel, whatever. If you look at the sort of history of animated Lord of the Rings and sort of Tolkien movies, there's this weird kind of schizophrenia to them. If you try to watch those 3 films back to back, The Hobbit, Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, and then The Return of the King, it feels almost gross in the way that it shifts back and forth in style and tone. I think that because of this through line that we have with Peter Jackson and his sort of design army, I think it's going to feel like going home again, right? I mean, think back to when, and this is a dangerous comparison to make, but think back to when those Star Wars prequels were first coming out, before we knew that they were awful, right? When it was like, I've waited so long to see more. I've dreamt so much about more, and now here it is. You know, there's a magic to that so few franchises can actually capture well. And I think that based on this trailer, I think that The Hobbit could totally do that.
All right, so I think we're going to wrap things up there. So Matt, thanks for joining us.
It was great to be here, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
And thanks to all our listeners here at IO9. It was really exciting being here this past year. We released 30 new episodes, our posts drew 250,000 page views, and we got to interview some really big-name guests, such as George R. R. Martin, Richard Dawkins, Simon Pegg, Robert Kirkman, Mary Roach, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. So we hope you all enjoyed having us as much as we enjoyed being here.
And we hope now you'll follow us over to our new home at geeksguideshow.com, where you can listen to episode 52 right now. It features an interview with award-winning science fiction author Ian MacDonald, as well as part 2 of our discussion about upcoming movie adaptations.
So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you over there.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of IO9. For this episode's show notes, to subscribe to this podcast, or for more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.